Oh, it was interminable speeches and stuff.
Welcome to the second part, the dessert of our event, so to say. We had the main course, now we have the dessert. I have a great privilege to introduce to you a very good and dear friend of mine, Mikhail Krutikhin. He's so popular in Bulgaria that he doesn't need any introduction. If you need to know anything that happens in Russia from an independent perspective, because as you know, it is not happening naturally to get the independent perspective on what's happening in the energy field because of the oversized institutions, oversized companies. So Misha is the definite source. And he has been kind enough to agree to fly over and give his view as a follow-up also to what Anders said, because a lot of people say that if you understand what is going on in the energy sector and you can forecast what's going on in the energy sector, you may be pretty sure that you can forecast what's going to happen with Russian policies and what's going to happen in Kremlin. Because after all, the dynamics is, this is the opposition there. Okay. We asked him to talk on specific issues because he's a great expert on so many subjects. You can talk with him about Islam, about Iran or the Middle East, but we would today address issues with regard to the new dynamics in the energy sector, the new constraints on Russian domestic policies. There is a transition period. I mean, we can definitely say that there is a transition mode in the Kremlin. Now, from what to what and how it would end, it's a different story, but obviously, after 16 years of rule of Mr. Putin, obviously the end cannot be that far away. So this is one thing. So he would take from what the previous speakers referred to with regard to Russia, and then we would indulge into the more intimate spheres of understanding the gas diplomacy or the gas policies of Russia and Gazprom and what that spells for the region. Because there's one thing that we need to understand. I mean, it's one thing to bring down the market share of Gazprom from 100% as in Bulgaria to below or around 50%. But Russian gas is in abundance, it's there, even on market terms it can compete. So therefore the idea is not how you can get without Russian gas, but how you can accommodate Russian gas and actually use it to enhance competition. Misha, дорогой, пожалуйста.
Well, first I must thank the organizers for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to visit Bulgaria. The first time was in 1967. Some of the audience have not been born then. Well, I've been traveling to this country on many occasions, and it's always a great relief and pleasure to meet all the new friends. Well, before I begin, I would like maybe to quote Senator John McCain, who once said in my presence that before dealing with Russia, we must very clearly understand whom we are dealing with, to make some identification of the system that exists, and that would define our approaches to that system and to our strategy and tactics in this area. I am speaking not as a Russian citizen, but as a representative of business, global business in this case. So please accept me as an unbiased observer, because I am not paid by any government, by any great corporation. We earn our money as just a consultant to some companies, embassies, funds, and so on and so forth. Well, first, there are two very interesting opinions on what the Russian regime actually is. One of the opinions is represented by Sergei Alexashenko, who lives now in Washington, D.C., and he is a former deputy chairman of the Russian Central Bank. He believes that the Russian political system is absolute monarchy without just one feature, inheritance of the throne. I disagree. There are some very important business people in Russia who believe that it is not true, because they say it's some sort of a structure which consists of feed chains. For example, this man is entrusted with controlling railroads, another one with controlling, for example, the gas industry, another one with the oil industry, field services, and so on and so forth. The same system exists in the Russian provinces. We have the governor as a godfather, and then some feed chains around him. But the problem now is that the feed base is shrinking because of some economical problems of Russia, and it is becoming more and more difficult for the godfather to control those guys who are his capos or the guys responsible for the feed chains, and they are beginning to, well, trespass, to claim controls over neighboring, so to say, feed chains. And we are going to witness more and more of such conflicts between Gazprom and Rosneft, between different companies and in different spheres of our society. But the main idea of the system is to install the right people on the flows of cash to the federal budget or from the federal budget. And some cash naturally disappears on the way to or from the budget. This is the main idea of the Russian business and the Russian political system. When we speak about some other aspects, such as military, political, or elections or so, they are of a secondary value to the main structure of this well, organization. This brings us to trying to understand what the main supplier of energy to Europe is, which is Gazprom. I can explain why I focus on Gazprom. Nobody in Europe is complaining about dependence on Russian coal or Russian oil. Well, even though Russian oil constitutes about 30% of consumption in the European Union, but no one worries about that. Because in any case, they can get oil from alternative sources. This is a common commodity, so to say. It's not like gas. In very many countries in Europe, dependence on Russian gas is absolute. Starting with Finland, from Finland to Bulgaria, that's the fact right now. But we see that this dependence is waning. It is decreasing. A very good example is the last quarter of 2014, when Mr. Putin decided to decrease the flow of gas to Europe to punish those traders who were selling gas back to Ukraine. We see a short drop in supply, but the market didn't notice that. The prices absolutely did not react to that, because the Europeans were able to redistribute the available gas flows in such a way as to prevent any crisis in this case. And when Gazprom and Mr. Putin finally understood that they couldn't do anything with such a measure, they resumed the gas flow across Ukraine and to the European customers. But it was very good for Gazprom, because a year later, the company was able to report a great increase of gas sales in Europe. They were compared to almost zero in the third quarter and in the beginning of the 2015. Well, let's now talk about Gazprom. It's a strange company. It's not. It's a conflicting company, internally conflicting. We witnessed several Gazprom at the same time. One Gazprom is, well, Yes, it is a political weapon which the government of Russia is trying to use against other countries. And it is also a source of some arrogant declarations and stupid assumptions, such as we are going to reroute very soon the gas flows from Europe to China and from China to Europe, dependent on the gas prices in those countries. It's absolute nonsense, because take a look at the volumes, take a look at the prices and the existence of infrastructure, where to go, and it's, well, still, we hear such declarations, as we heard the declaration of, well, very soon we are going to conquer 10% of the US gas market by producing gas from Stockman and some other projects. Well, silly declarations. Then one of the goals is punishing Ukraine, of course. The idea of the government is to deprive Ukraine of about 2 billion euros a year of, yes, of the fees it receives for the transit of Russian gas. But the price of such punishment is so great, because Russia has already spent more than $70 billion on building absolutely unnecessary or semi-unnecessary infrastructure. And some of the, well, basically we see that only well, friendly contractors, cronies of Mr. Putin, are benefiting from such an arrangement because they are building unnecessary pipelines. Then we see that there is such an issue with this part of Gazprom as Schröderization. I think, well, I will not, I'm not supposed to say that maybe in Bulgaria, you should feel that too, because, well, basically, I heard some of the politicians in Bulgaria today over the TV saying that, no, you have not bought all the Bulgaria, but you bought only some political parties in Bulgaria. Yeah, so this is... we see in very many countries local politicians behaving just like Mr. Schröder was behaving. It's a shame. It's a source of shame for the Germans, as they tell me. But it was a very easy prey for Gazprom, because Schröder was to pay alimonies to 3 ex-wives, and it was a very good time to catch him and to bribe him with a good salary of Gazprom. So I think the practice is going to continue. But we see another Gazprom as well. While, for example, the first Gazprom says, okay, we're going to build Turkish Stream, then the South European gas pipeline, and another wonderful pipelines. The second, the business entity of Gazprom says, no, we're not going to spend even a single cent on that. We're cutting down the costs. We're cutting down expenses on that project. We are eliminating the whole department of Gazprom, which was responsible for that contract. We are not going to hire pipeline vessels anymore. We are not going even to pay part of the fees to the Japanese companies that supplied the pipes for the South Stream. They are still lying on the shores in Bulgaria. And some of the pipes have not been paid for. And the Japanese are complaining about that. But we see that the business entity of Gazprom is interested in market expansion, whatever costs, because they have a great oversupply of gas domestically, and they have to sell it somewhere. They are looking for new customers. They want to maximize profit, as any corporation would do, and to minimize the losses. So when we deal with Gazprom, with our friends at Gazprom, we deal with the business entity. And this is why our clients sometimes come to us and ask us to help establish good relations with those. Yes, there is corruption, as you understand, but some people say it's a lubricant for business affairs with Gazprom. It's a traditional behavior of the Russian company. Well, and then there is another Gazprom, which is a good source of income for some contractors who build unnecessary pipelines. They build a very good pipeline from Sakhalin to Vladivostok. It is delivering just 1 billion cubic meters of gas a year instead of 13 booster stations, compressor stations. They built only 1. But it was a great triumph. It was a great success for Gazprom, as they declared a big victory. I believe it might happen with the power of Siberia. Because, well, the Chinese just do not want as much gas as Russia is promising, and the Chinese are not prepared to pay the real price for that gas. And I see, when I watch the development of that project, I see that, yes, they are building some of the pipeline. Maybe there will be one compressor station. At the gas treatment plant on the Amur River, instead of 7 units of preparing gas, they have now the project of 6 units. I think 1 unit would be enough. They will deliver that gas to the Chinese border and say, it's a great victory. And then they will forget about that project, because investing in that money-losing project is an absolute disaster economically for Gazprom and for the Russian economy. Well, the contractors will be very happy if they are able to build some more unnecessary pipelines. Well, and we see that Europe remains, well, China can be excluded. Europe remains the main operational ground for Gazprom. We see that in Asia, there is no big hope of achieving new markets and so on. Because, yes, really, if we add up all the plans of Gazprom, how much gas they were going to sell to Asia, on several occasions they said in public, yes, very soon, in a few years, we are going to sell more gas to Asia than we are selling to Europe. I remember when I heard that from an official of Gazprom, I couldn't resist. I raised my head and said, well, basically you are threatening Europe with cutting in half the volume of gas they are receiving, because the maximum amount of gas that Mr. Putin said Russia is going to sell to China was 68 billion cubic meters a year. You are selling now 126 billion cubic meters to Europe. That means you are going to cut it in half just to send more gas to China. That's absolute nonsense, and they are used to saying such, well, not realistic things at all. We see domestic market is not growing. If it is growing very slowly and in a very low scale. And in Europe, they have plenty of pipeline opportunities, old projects, new projects, and right now, if we calculate the sum of the transport capacity for Gazprom, it is double the amount of gas they actually deliver to Europe. It's only 50% used. They can use old pipelines instead of building new ones. Well, a problem. Will Europe need more Russian gas? This is, I borrowed it from BP. They believe that the amount of pipeline import, oh, sorry. That's, does it work? Where is my slide? The amount of piped gas to Europe is not going to increase dramatically. No.
At certain moments, you have to say yes.
Yeah. This one. We see that according to BP, Europe is not going to increase its pipeline imports dramatically. And when I talk to BP, they say, well, maybe the pipeline import will be less than that if the amount of LNG imports increases, if the price of LNG is competitive to piped gas. So, here is another one. This is the net import of natural gas to Europe. For the 4 years, it was declining. Yes, Europe was decreasing its domestic production of gas, but imports were shrinking even faster than that. In the year 2015, there was a little increase. Let's be frank about that. But it was not characteristic for Europe. I think it is going to decrease even more. This is what Gazprom promised to Europe, the red line. And this is what Mr. Miller promised to Mr. Putin. He said, okay, we are going in the year 2020 to deliver 339 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe. But in fact, we see that what Gazprom actually sells is much less, the black line. And the contracts that Gazprom has, they are the green dots. They are not what Mr. Miller promised to sell. Well, basically, we see that the Russian strategy in Europe is conflicting and controversial. First, the idea is to build two pipeline system, one in the Black Sea and one in the Baltic Sea, and then they are to meet in Austria at the Baumgarten hub, and then this system, this circled system, would be able to deliver as much gas as possible to the consumers and to eliminate the Ukrainian transit at all. Yes, it's quite a nice idea logistically, but economically, I do not think it is possible because the costs of this infrastructure are tremendous. Even if some political or organizational obstacles are well eliminated along the way with the European Commission, with the local countries, and I think the only beneficiaries would be, as usual, the contractors. Well, but now we see that Gazprom is changing its tactics. Before Mr. Putin admitted that the South Stream was a failure in the 1st of December 2014, Gazprom was insisting that it was ignoring the third energy package. They preferred separate deals with interested countries, and they never applied to the European regulators for permission to build a big project, the South Stream, across all the European nations along the route. They never applied for that, and then they say, well, the European Commission is against that. It just is not true, because they preferred to strike deals with Bulgaria, with other countries, with Austria, and just defying the European regulator at all. Then they were trying to build monopoly supply. They were owners of some pipelines, and it was against the rule of Europe to transport your own gas in your own pipelines across the borders of the members of the EU. Right now, they demonstrate that they are in compliance with the third energy package. Then we see that sometimes they are trying to delegate the projects to their allies. It's a very good example. This summer, during the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, there was a meeting of the Greek energy minister with the Russian energy minister, and they signed some sort of an agreement. It was not an agreement, a memorandum of understanding, as usual. They agreed to facilitate the creation of a joint venture which would build something which is called the South European gas pipeline from Greece to Italy, and maybe from Greece to the north, across Serbia to Austria. It was not clear, but it was not Gazprom. Gazprom was not involved. They agreed that Russian state-controlled investment banks would be the 50% participants in that joint venture, then the Greeks, and the financing is to come from Russia. It looked very nice for Greece, for Russia, for Gazprom, for everybody. But a couple of weeks ago, there was another meeting of the Russian energy minister with the new energy minister of Greece. And the new Greek minister said, okay, yes, we support this idea, and even Italy and Serbia and some other countries are supporting that, but we'll have to wait what the European Commission says. That means that it is not a settled affair at all. It exists in the eyes of the beholder, only at Gazprom. What Gazprom is doing, it has eliminated the whole department which was in charge of the South Stream. Absolutely. They gave 2 months to find new jobs to all those 100 people that were engaged with that project. Then they cut down all the expenses on the Turkish Stream, South Stream, and so on and so forth. So when they speak about Turkish Stream, it's just, well, words, words, words. So we'll have to witness some practical moves of Gazprom. Money, investing in specific actions. Maybe engineering surveys in Turkey. Maybe some, practical formation of a joint venture with some sources of financing. Then we can say, yes, they speak real things, but instead of inventing something. But we see that they are even offering new commercial terms for all the new contracts. This is a very important change in the behavior of Gazprom. It started maybe 3 years ago, but now it's a very important feature of Gazprom. There was a question of very expensive Russian gas that reaches Bulgarian consumers. And the TV people of the National Bulgarian TV asked me about that, what to do about that. Actually, maybe to start new projects which would apply new technologies of distributing energy of, well, basically I think there are some sort of solutions for that problem as well. Well, first, it is diversifying supplies of energy. It's not only Russia, but getting some, building the interconnectors from Greece into Bulgaria, striking some deals with Caspian countries, maybe even if through Turkey, Iraqi gas or Iranian gas, or in the future Turkmenistani gas comes to Turkey, maybe it would be possible to buy some sort of amount, maybe the Israeli gas as well. Or maybe some gas from the LNG terminal in Greece, if they expand that terminal. Well, there are some ways to get gas for Bulgaria. Yes, this is one way, one solution. Another one would be to reconsider the tax system. This is not the price of gas that the consumers pay and the price of gas that Gazprom supplies. Then third solution, it is possible to renegotiate the terms of contracts. For the past 3 years, over 70 cases of changes in the terms of Gazprom contracts with European consumers have been made. There were 7 cases that the consumers took Gazprom to arbitration. Only 2 cases reached the solution through arbitration, and 5 cases were settled before the court. And in all cases, Gazprom was suffering. They were repaying some cash for overpriced gas in previous years. Gazprom earmarks about $4 billion every year to repay the consumers for the gas which was too expensive for them in Europe. Bulgaria is not complaining. Bulgaria is not taking Gazprom to the court of arbitration. I do not know why. Then I believe this last issue is also very important because you can get gas, Russian gas, from Gazprom, but it will not be formally from Gazprom. Gazprom has established several, subsidiary companies all over Europe by Gazprom managers, but officially they are not Gazprom. You can strike a deal with them. They are selling gas on very simple terms. The price at the closest distribution hub, plus a small premium. Those managers have to get some money too. And the premium is not very large, it is small. It is possible. The only term is the new customer should be new, because they don't want to make a mess, mixing old contracts with new terms, and so it is possible to establish a new company in a power station, for example, or at some plant that produces fertilizers or some chemical plant, and to buy gas directly from those subsidiaries, or even from Gazprom Export itself. They are offering wonderful terms. It's not only auctions that they are organizing. It's just direct deals between consumers and Gazprom. It's another company. You do not deal with Mr. Miller, who is making silly statements. You are dealing with business people at Gazprom. Well, now it's a very big question. Is Russia, rich enough to finance everything it is planning about Europe, China, and whatever in terms of gas pipelines, gas projects? Well, we see that Gazprom is losing money, actually. The net profit, I think in the third quarter this year, the profit will be in the red. It will be loss, not profit. Fallen in 1 year from 137 to just 7 is a very good sign to understand how Gazprom is behaving. They have cut down the expenses on the power of Siberia, the pipeline to China. They are cutting down expenses in very many projects that they are undertaking. Upstream projects, exploration and development, and transportation projects as well. Then, gas production of Gazprom is declining. Not only because Gazprom is faced with some competition from Russian oil companies and some other companies that are delivering gas to domestic consumers in Russia, but also because there is not sufficient customers for Gazprom's gas elsewhere, worldwide. Usually we heard from Gazprom, no, we sell gas before producing it. So we are not going to produce some gas which we cannot sell. This is not true at all. Here is the figures for the year 2014. We see that the excessive gas oversupply, the potential of oversupply is 225 billion cubic meters. According to official statistics of BP, who are also watching this development, they just say it's over 200. This is what BP says. We calculated it, as you see from the figures for 1 year, so Gazprom can add another Europe plus some other customers to the current list of customers and to deliver gas at no cost, because the fields are already developed. They can produce that gas if the market is available. This is why, by the way, Gazprom insists in the negotiations with China on the Altai pipeline, which would start in the same ongoing fields and go instead of Europe, it will go to China across the border between Mongolia and Kazakhstan. It's not a very good project for China, and China is humiliating Gazprom. Well, first, I will tell you something about that project because it's a very good, it's like a joke, but it's real. Well, when Gazprom insisted on negotiations on the Altai pipeline, the Chinese, last year they said, okay, but you will need to build another 3,000 kilometers from that cross-border point to Shanghai or to some industrial areas of China when we need this gas. Okay, we know how to build pipelines. We have already built 3 pipelines from Central Asia to those areas. We are building the 4th one. We can build your pipeline as well, but you will have to pay for it. That was last year. This year, when Gazprom insisted, yes, we want that Altai pipeline, the Chinese deputy prime minister said, okay, we can accept your plans, but it will be an integrated solution. What's that? Gazprom asked. We are going to treat you as we are treating the Turkmens. How? Well, first, you will allow us to explore and develop gas on the Russian territory. Second, we are going to form maybe a joint venture to build pipelines on the Russian territory. And third, we are going to export our own gas that we produce in Russia. We are going to export it. It was not acceptable to Gazprom. First, they have an oversupply already. They do not need to explore new fields, new places of natural gas. Second, if they allow any alien to come into the construction of gas pipelines, that, well, alien partner would understand very quickly that the budget for 1 average kilometer of the Russian pipelines is triple the cost of any regular. It's the corruption tax, it's some sort of a kickback and so on. So it's impossible. And second, the Russian law, which bans foreigners, which bans anyone but Gazprom to export gas from Russia. So they said no. So this pipeline, Altai, for the time being, is just some sort of negotiations which have been dragging legs for about 15 years. So the price of gas. Gazprom is already losing. They sell gas, just take a look. This is the price of gas to Germany. Now it is even cheaper. It is not $129, it is 120. That's selling gas to Germany. And Nord Stream transportation cost, let's deduct it. Let's deduct 30% export duty, and we come to the figure $1.89 per 1 million British thermal units, which is much lower than the cost production transportation goes before the entrance of the Nord Stream, which is going on. So Gazprom is losing money already. Just take a look at those figures. Okay, they sell gas in Germany below cost. They are losing money. If they build a new pipeline from Germany to Austria and then hope to expand it to Italy, Balkan nations, and Turkey to bypass Ukraine, what the cost of that gas is going to be? It's not economical at all. It is already a failure. But, well, when we look at those figures, I always recall the approach of Gazprom to international conferences. They usually send someone from Gazprom Export. I know the names. I very frequently meet them at different conferences. Before Mr. Putin admitted that Gazprom is going to obey the third energy package, the main idea of their Gazprom presentations was monopoly is good and competition is bad, period. It was supported by scientifically looking slides, wonderful presentations, but the idea was very simple. Right now, they are just saying, with the same sort of very good slides, excellent slides, and good English of the presenters, but they say, oh, Russian gas is cheaper than American LNG, period. Very simple idea. Well, the Americans are selling gas right now cheaper than production, liquefaction, and transportation cost. They hope to gain some market. They hope that soon maybe the prices would recover. But Gazprom is trying to compete with the Americans on its traditional hunting ground, but they are also losing money. And who is going to lose more money, Gazprom or the American suppliers? I'm not sure about the outcome of this price war. Because, well, basically, in a couple of years, or, well, let's put it 2020, there will be an additional supply of gas in the form of liquefied gas from Australia, the United States, Canada, Iran, and some Malaysia and some other countries, to the amount of about 150 million tons a year, LNG. Now we have about less than 300. It will be another 50 to 60% addition to the current supply of LNG. And believe me, the prices of gas are going to remain very low for the next maybe 5 or even more years. One of the experts last year at the Flame conference in Amsterdam said, well, we predict the price of gas in Europe at Henry Hub price plus €1. It's not reasonable because, well, you have the Henry Hub price. You have to add about $3, maybe a little bit less for liquefaction. Then it will be transportation, about $1, maybe less than $1, half a dollar for regasification. It is 6 to 7 if you add all the costs. You cannot sell for 1 million BTU. It's not cubic meters. But still, very many experts believe that the price war is going to continue for several years and the prices are going. This is very good for Bulgaria. If you can get gas at so cheap prices, why bother with some technical experiments of establishing new systems of redistributing gas and so on? You will get it cheap. Well, it is not business as usual for Gazprom. Can Gazprom win this price war? Well, basically, I believe yes. First, Gazprom has a lot of overcapacity of supply. They have existing infrastructure they can use. And then they have government assistance. Maybe it will be some subsidies from the government, or if the government can afford it, or some sort of reduction of the export tax, which is 30% for gas right now. So I believe Gazprom is going to stay in the business and to stay in the play. Gazprom remains as it is until Mr. Putin is the chief manager of Gazprom. It is not Miller, because Miller just receives instructions from the Kremlin, from Mr. Putin himself, carries them back to the headquarters of Gazprom, and and he delivers very optimistic reports to Putin, which are very often not true. Then the business entity of Gazprom tries to, distort those instructions or ignore them, or to do something to make Gazprom a business entity, but not an arrogant political weapon of the Kremlin. Well, there were some rumors about reforming Gazprom this year before the session of the Presidential Energy Commission. And the media said, okay, on the agenda of that session, there will be the reforming of Gazprom idea. Mr. Putin said, no, we are not going to put that on the agenda for a very simple reason. Gazprom says that the company is the owner of the gas distribution networks in Russia. It is responsible for supplying gas to very many households and industrial consumers and many regions, and taking this transportation part of the business from Gazprom would disrupt the supply chains. It will take several years to return to normal. And Putin said, well, until you prove to me that the pros of the plan are better than the cons of the reform plan, until that, we are not going to put that on the agenda of any discussion. We are not discussing any reforms of Gazprom right now. Well, now, one of the last slides, can Gazprom be trusted? Well, it depends on whom you are dealing with. If you are dealing with the political face of Gazprom, well, I don't think you can trust that. But if you are dealing with some business people who are selling gas at auctions or through direct deals, or if you deal with them in the courts or arbitration, yes, I think it is possible to cooperate with that company. For Bulgaria, I think it can be very important. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Misha. As always, very, very interesting. I forgot to announce that after Misha, Vasko Nachev would do a very short presentation on Hannes Baruch block, which is something that is quite in the epicenter of interest of the public. Okay, now the question as Ambassador Popovich.
Mr. Krutikhin, I'm glad to see you after 5 years at that conference in Rotterdam. I didn't want to distract you before your important speech. I should say to my colleagues that you impress both Western European audiences and Southeast European audiences. But my question is on two issues that you slightly touched upon, which concern the region, that is Southeast Europe, and Bulgaria. You presented the Nord Stream 2 project. I agree with you that the main idea is to bring the gas down to Baumgarten, and from there to distribute and sell the gas in the region of Central, Southeast Europe, even South Europe. And you said that building new infrastructure would cost a lot, and therefore it would not be economical. I would ask you, would you not agree that in the next 2 or 3 years, at the most, 13 interconnections will be built in this whole region, funded by the EU to a large extent. The most important, which of course is Greece-Bulgaria interconnection, because this is the only outlet for new gas, for diversified gas. But actually, with EU money, if the Nord Stream 2 succeeds, it has a way to this Nord Stream 2 gas to reach Baumgarten, and from there on, the infrastructure would have been paid by the EU and various investors, not by Gazprom. And my second question is, in this scenario, if I'm correct, would you see the need or also a viability for a Bulgarian regional gas hub, not necessarily fed on South Stream, but on incremental increase of gas from both Russia, Caspian Sea, East Mediterranean, whatnot? Do you think this idea of the Bulgarian government is viable in a, let's say, in a more modest, minimized version? Thank you very much.
I remember your presentation in Rotterdam. That was the first time when I learned about the idea of a Bulgarian gas hub. Well, basically, it's a very good idea. Logistically, it's good for Bulgaria. It will be not only a distribution hub in physical sense, it would be a platform for maybe determining a regional, some sort of a marker for gas prices. It's good. But when Bulgaria increases its importance, because it owns the gas hub and the platform for defining the price, I think the neighbors of Bulgaria will not be very happy about that. Because the political situation around Bulgaria is not that situation of a unity of approach to the gas. There are some signs of some preliminary agreements of forming a regional cooperation, but still I think it is a very long road before physical implementation of that idea. I like the idea very much. If actually there are several pipelines coming to Bulgaria, I am doubtful about the Nord Stream, or even one of the branches of the Turkish Stream that could reach Bulgaria. First, Gazprom is not doing anything practical about that. And second, when Gazprom, let us imagine, Gazprom reaches an agreement with Turkey and builds one of the four pipelines in one of the first spurs of that South Stream, Turkish Stream into Turkey. Turkey will receive about 16 billion cubic meters a year. It will replace the Trans-Balkan pipelines to Turkey from Russia, from Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria. So it will be an empty pipeline for Turkey. And I believe in this case, the pipeline could be used by the countries along the route to deliver maybe some gas from the Caspian area or from some other Mediterranean area or from the Middle East, all the way to Ukraine or to Slovakia or to some other countries. Yes, this is another scenario. So we can discuss different scenarios right now, but I'm doubtful before I see any practical steps, before I see investors in that. Then this is still a matter for speculations. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. So, follow the money and the corporate interest. Other people, new questions, because if you don't ask, I will start asking, Misha, and then it would be no question. Okay. Super. Misha, my question to you is rather in a different category. Mr. Putin, well, it's a geopolitical stuff, more or less. You rightly mentioned that we are probably the only country in Europe that is not pushing its interests through a more aggressive line towards Gazprom, either through court for overpricing. By the way, just for your information, it is not pertaining only to Bulgaria, that's a general stuff. It's a copycat case that is repeated in each and every case. Could be Poland, could be the Baltic countries, etc. It basically states that after 2011, the prices of gas that have been paid to Gazprom are overpriced, benchmarked to the relevant, usually German border prices. So in that particular case, it's a piece of cake to prove in court that there is a margin of overpaid gas. And I've made some calculations for Bulgaria's case that it is easy proof of at least $300 million. Easy proof. I mean, we could do it over the back of, but going back now, obviously, Mr. Putin realizes that Gazprom is not a political weapon. Instead of being an asset in foreign policy, it becomes a liability now. Or, even more, it becomes a competitive, sort of a normal company. Then if he cannot use oil, he cannot use gas. It's the diffused weapon, so to say. Then what is, I asked this question for the United States, what's the role of energy in US foreign policy? What's the role then of energy in Russian foreign policy, apart from Schröderization, which is the eternal thing? I mean, in Bulgaria, we have a very strong case. Very strong case. Actually, we are now about to pay a handsome amount of money for nuclear power plants. So this is energy, Russian foreign policy, and Mr. Putin.
Well, a while ago, I was trying to convince my audiences that Gazprom is not a political weapon of Kremlin. It is the foreign policy of Kremlin, which is the political weapon of Gazprom. So it depends on from which angle you look at the company and at the policy of the Kremlin. Well, basically, I believe that in very many cases, the statements that Mr. Putin is making about Gazprom, its role, its projects, are not exactly well corresponding to the real shape of the things in the company or in the gas industry, in the energy industry. Sometimes the Russian leadership overestimates the influence of Gazprom, the leverage of Gazprom, and the use of Gazprom in different, well, there was an idea not only to punish Ukraine, but to open a new export channel in Asia, in China. It started with the very strict instructions of Mr. Putin, well, we need to reroute some of the gas from Europe to China. On the 23rd of October 2012, Putin gave instructions at the session of his Presidential Energy Commission, first to accelerate all the investment decisions of Gazprom in the Eastern Program, and to redo some very important strategic documents, such as the general scheme of developing the Russian gas industry through 2035 and the Eastern Program of Gazprom. He gave the Ministry of Energy and Gazprom till the end of that year, 2012, to do those documents. We still have not seen any of those documents, because first, the instructions were issued. Gazprom made investment decisions on many projects, starting with the Power of Siberia and the Vladivostok LNG project, and then started to, well, to ignore some of the instructions. The Vladivostok LNG has been absolutely eliminated from the plans of Gazprom, and some other projects are started shrinking. It was like this with the eastern destination. It was like that with the LNG projects of Gazprom, which the company over-publicized. It was the same thing with in Europe as well. So I believe Mr. Putin has some distorted idea of the leverage of Gazprom. Even though when he gives instruction to the company, he says, regardless of costs. Because in the East, for example, the economists and planners of Gazprom resisted for 4 years the investment decisions on those projects, saying they are not commercial at all. Take a look. The power of Siberia. I have it in my computer. The power of Siberia, all the calculations of income and spending till 2048. Every year, how much they are going to get, how much they are going to spend, and there are two small lines. Payback duration. If they calculate it by net profit, it is 18.5 years. If they calculate it on discounted net profit, which is the regular way to count that, it says не окупается. It shall not be paid, it shall not reach payback by 2048. Even at high prices of gas that existed when they made those calculations. Right now we see that, well, Gazprom says we can sell gas on the Chinese border at, we will cover our expenses if the gas is $260 per 1,000 cubic meters. We know that China is buying gas at $140 per 1,000 cubic meters. They are not going to pay more to Gazprom. So it is worth just to compare how much Russia can actually spend on politically motivated projects. And I believe there is a very wrong idea of the political leadership about the ability of the Russian budget, of Gazprom and the Russian big oil companies such as Rosneft to survive the critical situation in their finances.
Grazie mille. Well, it's very important because when we talk and we preach that it's not a matter of politicians as in the old days, the emperor with a big coffer of money in part, okay, like Peter the Great with a railroad from Moscow to St. Petersburg. No more, no more. If you don't, as Misha says, if you don't see the money, the big money flowing, disregard, simply disregard the project. Krasin, Plamen, and then who else?
Mikhail, when you quoted Golubev, his statement of earlier this year, it came to my mind that I have actually two science fiction questions. Number one is, if trying to improve the competitive edge of Gazprom or any other company, the government reduces or repeals the export tax, would it be sufficient? First. And second sub-question, would it create a tension on the budget? So, in what measures? And number two, this is more science fiction, but more interesting for me. Imagine there is a change in the helmet of the Russian Federation. There is another president, irrespective of who he is. Not the current couple, you know. So do you expect that, for example, the business part of Gazprom will be more present than the political side of it? Or what's the ratio, so to say? Or it will be the same?
Well, the first question is very simple. You just take the figures, 30% export tax. Yes, in some cases it can do the trick, but it depends on the prices of gas at that moment and the price at the supplier and recipient ends. Yes, in the European case, I think it can be possible to monetize on that issue. We witnessed some of such cases. For example, gas is exported without the export tax to Turkey via the Blue Stream pipeline. Well, one example, it is profitable for Gazprom and for Turkey. And there were some other cases. For example, a joint venture of Kazakhstan and Gazprom can export gas without the export tax, but they export that to three companies. All three companies are subsidiaries of Gazprom. Yes, and they start selling that gas abroad with a great profit. It's a usual scheme for Gazprom, because sometimes money just disappears on the Swiss accounts without being returned to the Russian budget. Yes, yes, it is possible. And second, about the change which could be good for Gazprom. I think it is not only some speculation about the fate of Gazprom. It is the speculation about the economic policy of the government. Just to illustrate how it goes, well, tomorrow in the evening I'm going to attend, it is called the Economic Club of the Carnegie Moscow Center. Yes, very interesting. The Russian economists meet there to discuss, well, sometimes fantastic ideas, something like that. At the last session of that club, it was the first session, there was an idea of a prominent economist who said, okay, we decided at the Stolypin Club of Economists to support some of the ideas of academician Glaziev. Maybe some of you know about Glaziev. He has some sort of a Soviet-style ideas about economy. And okay, I said, why? You are the proponent of the market-based economy, and then Glaziev. Why so? He said, you know, we have a plan. Maybe if we accept what Glaziev suggests, well, some non-standard functions of the central bank, direct financing from the central bank to some industries, some additional printing of money, investing and pouring them into some industries again. Well, for 6 months, 7 months, it would be enough to buoy up to our economy. It would prosper, seem to be prospering. In 2 years, it will be an economic collapse. And then our political leadership will see the failure of that approach and start real liberal economic reforms after that. So we can speculate about such a very clever plan, but right now there is a discussion in Russia about where to go. What plan to accept, because, well, if the price of oil remains at this level right now, I think that by the end of this year or by the beginning of the next year, the so-called reserve fund will be exhausted. They will try to replenish it from the fund of the Natural Prosperity Fund, and then, after that is exhausted as well, they will have to borrow from the hard currency and gold reserves of the central bank. And this is a very dangerous way for the Russian economy. We still have several months till the end of the year where that group of economists is to present their plan to Putin. Then another group of economists is going to present their plan in the beginning of the next year. And I think it will take about 2 years for the plans to get vetted and accepted. By how long the Russian economy is going to go on like it is going on, I don't know. Plans are plans, but economy is economy. So the same with Gazprom, how long it survives. And yes, it would be natural to make the same thing with the Gazprom as they made with the oil industry of Russia. Well, but then they reversed their steps, and we see in the oil industry also. We used to have about 60% of oil produced by non-state associated companies. Right now it's less than 30%. So it's, instead of privatization, the regular slogan of the government, we see a creeping deprivatization. Well, we had private corporation, Yukos, TNK-BP, Udmurtneft, Slavneft, Sibneft, and so on, and now we're Bashneft and Itera. They are now parts of either Gazprom or Rosneft. So
you don't think that this business about privatizing Rosneft until the end of the year is not realistic?
Who's going to buy that? I wouldn't buy that. Well, first, even the Chinese refuse. They say, why buy in this company? Because we have already bought all the oil the company produces. The Indian says, well, okay, we are going to be co-owners, but the oil goes to China. And we're not going to get any money for that oil because the money had already been paid to finance the deal of acquisition of TNK-BP. So who's going to buy it? It's a minority stake. It has no right of vote or anything in the...
On this bright note, I give the last question to Mr. Nikolov.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vasilyev. Mr. Krutikhin, may we know your opinion on two issues. First, about efforts which Russia made to increase Russia's territory in North Ocean, in the region of North Ocean. And second, about the opportunities to develop natural gas supplying in Russia's Far East region. Thank you.
Yes, first, the Arctic Ocean and Russia's claim to the UN that this is the continuation of the continental shelf and so on. I believe it is impossible to prove it is a continuation of anybody's continental shelf, because they have not drilled a single well there. They just scratched a little some sediments from the bottom of the sea. It's impossible to prove it is. They found some sort of stones that may be volcanic or sedimental. It is not convincing proof. Then again, the reserves, hypothetical reserves of oil and gas in that area are well described as huge. Nobody can say anything without drilling wells. Maybe it is mineral water. Maybe it's impossible. They just do not exist. You cannot prove they are there. First, you cannot prove it is your territory or aquatory, and you cannot prove there are reserves there. Well. And the second one was
in the Far East Russia region.
In the Far East, if you have any hope to get more gas in the Far East, it is off Sakhalin. The main project that has some opportunity to produce some gas is Sakhalin 3. And the block, the Kirinsky block of that project, it already contains 3 identified plays, which is Kirinskoye, South Kirinskoye, and Minginskoye. The largest of them is South Kirinskoye. Gazprom hopes it can develop that field, but it is impossible under sanctions to bring foreign technologies to that. It is impossible to develop that field by platforms because they need the subsea equipment to do that. Only 4 companies in the world can produce that, and they are either Norwegian or American. And they are under sanctions because no one else can produce such an equipment. The second problem is the field contains some oil. On all laws, geological or industrial or Russian, you must produce first oil and then gas, because if you produce gas, the pressure will fall, and 500 million tons of oil is going to remain underground. It's a big... this is what gave the Americans the right to expand the sanctions to this project, because Gazprom said it's only gas. We registered the discovery of only 6 million tons of oil, which is very small. We can disregard that. And the Russian, controllers, regulators at the Ministry of Energy accommodated their wish to say, okay, we'll register not 500 million, but only 6 million tons of oil. The Americans said no. According to our data, it is an oil and gas deposit. So, and the depth is, it fits the description of a project that is subject to international sanctions, to the US sanctions. So there is a very big problem with developing that gas reserve. And it will be expensive gas.
So, Misha, thank you very much. One thing, just a takeaway. Because of the enormous production base that is underutilized by Gazprom, we shouldn't rule out the possibility that it would remain very competitive in the future, just because of its ability to produce gas that one way or another has to leave the well. So, and I'm very grateful to him for his sort of overall presentation, even touching on some political dimensions, as always. Thank you very much, Misha.
Thanks a lot.